about 5. Hi, good morning, good morning to you, Rob, and good afternoon and early evening from me.
Hey, how are you?
Doing pretty well, pretty well. Happy Thursday for me. Happy Friday to you.
That's right. It's Friday morning here, and I'm gutted because my coffee cup is now empty. It's
Last of the
it's
day for
early
me.
in the day. Yeah, how late do you do coffee? I mean, that's a small coffee, right?
This way, a single espresso from I have a little espresso machine. About 4 p.m. is actually when my machine turns off on a schedule. If it hasn't been used. But that's about my cutoff. Anything later than that, but also people with ADHD, caffeine affects you a little differently. Like you still get some energy from it, but it's not nearly as wiring as I think non-ADHD people in general. So I found that we
My
often have an easier time drinking caffeine and falling asleep 3 hours later.
my
Oh, here. Oh,
psychologist,
here.
my
Go ahead.
psychologist. I was just pausing. It's just there's a slight delay, but that's fine. My psychologist tested me for ADHD. She gave me the test, and I failed. Apparently, I don't have ADHD, and her response was just like this. Huh. Apparently you don't. It's like I can do it again if you want. I don't know. I just think I knew how
I
to.
feel
I knew
like
how to get through the
there's
test.
a lot of overlap with other like personality traits. So I think it's something that can definitely go either way. But it's
Yeah,
I've given a couple of talks about it now actually. Like ADHD in tech, kind of using some of the attributes to your advantage, which it was pretty popular at SQL Bits last year.
totally. I find that in comedy, I'll often end up having an energy drink, quite late into the evening because I'm about to get on stage and need to be funny. Um, and uh, and and that's just a whole lot easier if I have some amounts of caffeine and guarana and whatever flowing into me. But yeah,
Oh, but of course, and
I
the
actually
go ahead.
I have a joke about that even where I had seen so one of the energy drinks here is called Mother. I don't know if you have that over there, but yeah, I weirdly I had picked one up on my way to see my psychologist, and so she asked me about my mother. My answer was cold. I put it on. I put it
That's
out of
funny.
reach, distant. But it's all good. I am sorry. I'm chuckling to myself because I could now go into a 20-minute bit about all kinds of stuff, but I won't. It's all fine.
I'm just quickly
But
responding to Donald in the chat.
oh yeah, hey
There you go.
Donald. I've switched to see the comments bit over there, and when you type, it's
Yep.
analytic servers.
Yeah, exactly. It comes from the company itself. Occasionally, what I'll do if Steve and I are both here is we'll usually have that one up. But then if either of us are responding with us, like it's an individual comment of opinion rather than like a company statement, we usually have our own YouTube channels up so we can like the three chats can go into there to make it clearer who's speaking. Sometimes if there's
Sure.
like we're just
Yeah,
listing a link, he'll come from Analytic
yeah.
Endeavors. If I'm giving a flavor piece, he'll come from me or him.
As opposed to like just dash RH at the end. Yeah.
We sometimes do that if we're lazy too, but it for people watching later, and I feel like separate icons and names are usually helpful to see in like the live stream replay because these chat streams will show and play back with the actual live stream later on YouTube, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. No, that's good. The but yeah, I do find that caffeine is good for me, but it's early here. I say it's early. It's like it's after 8:30, so it just feels early. Normally normally at this point I'm leaving the house. I'm going to see a customer somewhere or something like that, but today it's just like doing stuff, coming into the room, making sure I've got my green screen set up behind, which was all of that. But yeah, so
Now I will say the as well for since this is the first time to the channel, let's start with doing a little bit of an intro of you and kind of like where you're coming from and everything, a little background, any flavor that you want to add about like stuff that you like to do. But that way it gives the channel and the rewatches that we get later on a chance to kind of know what you've been doing kind of in the BI space, the last 20-25 years.
yeah, because it is about that long. You want me to talk about myself? I'm Rob Farley. I live in Adelaide, Australia. I grew up in the UK. I moved to I've moved from the UK to Australia twice because I moved back in my 20s, and so the first time I moved to Australia, I lived in Melbourne for a while, and then in my late 20s, I moved back to Australia and moved to Adelaide, where my wife grew up. So I've been living here now a long time. My BI stuff goes back to, dabbling with stuff back in SQL 7 when the analysis services kind of turned up. And what I noticed at the time was that actually I just used to kind of consider that I was prepping the data for reporting back in like SQL 6 and 6.5 kind of days. I had customers in programming days where they had a whole ton of data and so on, and I had noticed that when they needed to run reports at the end of the month or whatever, they were slow, and I was just like, I reckon that we can prep that data and make it better, because it's read only at that point. And I had inadvertently made cubes because I just wanted to make sure that the data was able to be responsive for reports and not have to try to trawl through tons of stuff. I mean, nicely indexed, sure, but still a lot of work to go through and do all of the stuff to make it right for a report. I was like, I can do that in advance, and I can like have that sitting there, and then they can have like snappier reporting. And then like in 99 they started, or 98, 99, they started talking about analysis services in SQL 7. I'm like, this rings bells with the kind of sentiment that I had before. But this is I was a programmer in those days. I wasn't a data specialist at all or anything like that. That kind of came later when I started to realize, actually, the data space is big enough to specialize in. And
at what point did you notice it kind of like starting to skyrocket up into any type of like analytics or business intelligence purely from more of this like backend database and DBA type stuff?
I had bit of programming, right? And I had through the 90s and the start of the noughties, whatever you want to call them, I had been about the applications. I moved into kind of management of stuff and all that kind of thing, and but I always knew that data was the most important thing, and that an application to look after the data was significant. And from the user perspective, they wanted it to be managed happily, but they also wanted to be able to report on the data significantly. And so the reporting was huge. And so everything in the applications that I was doing was focused on the data, both the relational data and the analytical data, whether that was in an actual cube or not, or was kind of beside the point. But then, of course, in 2005, by 2005, I was involved in the community, and I knew from presentations and so on that what made people turn up, and that data stuff was interesting, but there was a particular interest in all the BI related reporting stuff. And then in 2005, of course, that was a big release for for BI stuff.
Yep.
And we got integration services, and we got analysis services better than it had been before, and reporting services really started coming into its own. And in fact, Microsoft brought out courseware. They got a lot more serious about letting people know, because I feel like back in 2000 and before that as well, they had some of that stuff, but it wasn't.
Well, it was juvenile, yeah.
Right. In 2005, it kind of came into its own better, and so there was just a big interest in that, and so I was teaching courses on it. I was getting asked to do, work in that kind of space, and it was the amount of stuff that was that people were asking me to do for them that led me to set up a company and start doing that stuff for customers, and so there's always been very much two bows to what I do. There's the analytics stuff, sure, but there's also the hardcore tuning and so on. I find that there's I'm always big on what's happening in internals. As we'll see when we have our discussion about fuzzy stuff, I want to know what's happening behind the scenes. It's all well and good to be able to go, oh, I can do this and pick this and pick this. I'm just like, yeah, but what's it doing? You know, and in some ways, look, I love the abstraction, but I like to know what's going on. And so in the relational stuff, that's in what's happening with indexes, what's going on with the internals, how can I make something run quickly, and how can I explain to other people how to make stuff run quickly. And in cubes and so on, back in the multi-dimensional, and then through to tabular and the Power BI and now Fabric stuff and so on, I'm interested in how that storage is working. I want to know what's happening with the optimizers to be able to go, right, so if we do it this way, there's opportunities and so on. And I feel like that's very much shaped how my career and how the presentations that I give and so on have been have gone. So analytics has always been a part of my story, I suppose, but I think I'm also known very much for my indexing style stuff. I way back in like 2009 2010, I did a couple of talks at SQL Bits that people still quote back at me on a regular basis, and they're not analytical at all. They're purely engine stuff, and but that's kind of nice that I'm remembered for that.
Well, it's nice when I'll give part of a quote without the actual punchline, but I'm sure I believe every country has a way to, especially the Europeans, because there's almost like friendly racism within Europe compared to like the US, which is actually bad. But like it's the Italians have jokes about the Irish have jokes about like the Swedes, but in ways that are definitely different.
Banter. It's banter. It's not racism. Banter, it's banter.
Sure. That's fair. But there's a banter joke about but the joke that I like that it has. It's a person from a different country, depending on who I ask to tell the joke. But it's so like it's like a 70-year-old man. You meet him at a bar, and he's talking about, so like you see that fence down the road, I built that. You see that church, I built that too. Like you see, he goes on and on and on. Let's see all this, and then there's like, but you do this thing one time, and you're forever known.
I know the one you mean. I know the one you mean.
Yep, exactly. That joke's been told a lot, but there's always a person from a different country. Yes. You plug in and swap around that, but I just remember that as the lasting legacy that person has to keep it PG.
Yes. No, there's a Black Mirror episode about that. About I think the first Black Mirror.
Oh God, yeah. One of the worst episodes, I'd say. It's hard for people to start watching this show.
I love Black Mirror, but I always tell people skip the first like 2 episodes. And then
come back after you watched a couple seasons.
Whoa, what the heck? I'm not interested in this. And in fact, I will tell people, start with like that episode, and start to understand that it's But no, there is that whole thing of it very much depends on what is it that you're. Life is about niches, right? We can be in the masses, but actually, the experts in things, that the expertise is narrower and narrower these days. Everything is so wide. If you're an expert in something, it ends up being quite narrow, and then quite often that's an area that there isn't necessarily a ton of work in. I know. I mean, I get that there are people out there who specialize in performance tuning and so on, and I sure I will do that, but I also get that. I can't spend every minute of every day tuning systems for clients because I go in there within half an hour. I go, okay, here's the problem, and I'm just like, I should have charged more for that, and so. But I feel like analytics is more like the bread and butter of what I do, day to day. Because
well, exactly, and like it's the modern BI stack for a lot of that stuff too. But also like thinking of that and on the idea of data and the topics of like new announcements today, and to the idea of the fuzzy matching that you want to talk about. Where do you want to get started on that conversation and kind of on some of the new things that we have in SQL now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I find the whole push with Fabric is fascinating. Of course, it's there's some really great things about the idea of you know, the overall Fabric umbrella and consolidating a lot of things inside that. But I also love the fact that you know, SQL 2025 is coming through. There's a few things about it that I feel like is stuff that we've been asking for forever. You know, when there's one particular feature that I'm really hoping makes it into the cut that I can't talk about because of NDA stuff. And now that I'm no longer an MVP, I don't know that I'll even find out about it until it's, you know, announced publicly, which is a bit frustrating. But there's a few things. But I look at the fact that, like, you can install Developer Edition of SQL 2025 in standard mode, and I was like, wow, because we've been asking for that literally for 20 years. Like when SQL 2005 came out, we were asking on Connect, it was back then, and asking, hey, can we tell Developer Edition to run in like standard mode? And finally, 20 years later, we've got that. And the fuzzy thing is the same. I remember having chats with Jamie Thompson. Do you remember Jamie Thompson? He was big in integration services.
Wasn't
English
so with Anna Darko, right?
I'm not sure.
Texas guy. He was
no,
like
no.
but yeah, but
Jamie Thompson.
Okay.
He was
okay. There was
SSIS
another
junkie.
Jamie who was an MVP. Yeah. Okay.
Different guy.
Gotcha.
This is Jamie Thompson. He was SSIS junkie, worked for Conchango in the UK, and he was the guy for integration services for quite a number of years. And these days, it still does data, but he's not really in the Microsoft space anymore. But I remember having a conversation with him at I don't know, I'm going to say like probably an early MVP summit for me back in 2007, 2008, and being like, there's fuzzy stuff in integration services, but wouldn't it be great if we could also have it inside T-SQL and so on, for the sake of, you know, the times when you wanted to do transforms inside, you know, inside the SQL engine as opposed to outside. And
not having to use something like Power Query.
Right. In fact, should I show you a couple of things?
Yes, absolutely. Let's go ahead and pop that up.
So if fine. I've just pulled up a web page which you're going to show. Yeah, right. So when I think about, I was going to show you this inside Visual Studio, but my computer, when I spun it up this morning, said, "Oh no, we need to restart your computer before we do that." And I'm just like, you know what? I don't actually need to show you proper stuff. I'm happy to refer to what other people have written about this. So here's a post from I don't know, 5 years ago from Dinesh. And mind you, this is still 15 years after, 14 years later, at least, that we were talking about it in the days of SQL 2005, when we had integration services, and fuzzy was part of that. But integration services had two fuzzy things. There was fuzzy lookup and there was fuzzy matching. And the concept of this, and I'm just kind of scrolling down slowly, the idea is that you might want to do a lookup, like effectively a join between, you know, some data that you've got and a source. And the idea is that, well, the data might not actually match, right? If I scroll back up here and say, if we've got this data and there's clearly some typos in here, I imagine, you know, this is Roberto, and I'm guessing it's probably supposed to be Roberto or whatever, but I don't know, who knows? And the idea is we want to be able to match that with, you know, with proper data, and they've got this fuzzy lookup where essentially the idea is to say, I've got my data that's in the flow, and I want to be able to see how it matches against, in this case, a person table inside AdventureWorks, and I want to be able to do a fuzzier match on it. I'm going to come back to this little thing in here about store new index. That's interesting stuff, but I'll come back to it. But the idea is to be able to say, look, I want to join between input name and full name, but then having an advanced tab that says, okay, but actually, I want to consider a similarity threshold so that I can say only join, well, no, rather also join if it's not an exact match, but it's close. And this is the concept of fuzzy. The thing of saying it might not be exactly the same, but it's going to be close enough to consider that it's fine. And the secret to this inside integration services is that integration services is like a .NET application behind the scenes.
Yep.
And so that was never really a thing that you could just build straight into T-SQL. It was, more complex than that. So the idea of being able to say, left join fuzzy, or whatever, left join on, this equals this with fuzzy and, various thresholds and so on, was never really a thing. But at the end of the day, that was handy. There's also the concept of fuzzy grouping. If I scroll down even further, I think this post has something on fuzzy grouping. I'm hoping so. Yeah, the fuzzy grouping transformation. And this is the idea of saying we've got a whole bunch of stuff and we want to group by name, but we're going to have some names that don't quite match because of, again, like typos and so on. And so we want to be able to fold them into the fuzzy groups. And that's about all that he mentions about the fuzzy grouping, but we're going to explore this a bit more. But one of the things with this that I always found was that we would end up seeing that we had some data, and then instead of being able to just go, oh yeah, we've got a nice index on that on the lookup environment, and so we can very quickly just jump in and go, yep, let's grab that. Fuzzy is kind of different because you might have an index, but if I've misspelt your name with an E instead of an A, what am I supposed to look through to find the name that is similar to yours? An index doesn't really fit that. And in fact, if I go back up in this article by Dinesh to that page where I said that there's this mention of an index in here, where it says, I can generate an index and I can store that index. I'm going to maintain it in some way. And that's interesting. That sounds like it's going to be quite appealing, but actually all it's doing is indexing the tokenized version of the data that we're using to do lookups. It'll help, but it doesn't make it quick. And what I always found with this kind of a thing was it was great to a point, but like in proof of concepts and demos, it was just fine. When I tried to see how it would go on a larger set, it didn't necessarily work all that well, especially if I'm dealing with a scenario where I've got hundreds of thousands or millions of different people, and I'm wanting to figure out, is this person actually the same as this person? And at that point, I'm not just trying to match on name, I'm trying to match on all kinds of different things. Like I'm trying to make a thing which says, I've got the name, I've got the date of birth, I've got the address, various stuff like that. And then I've got this other one, and I'm going, do I think that these match? And I found that it doesn't.
Well, and it's a very expensive process to go over any amount of rows, right? In general, with like the limitations of this. Yeah.
And this, of course, integration services has almost disappeared these days. It's been a while since I've actually opened that stuff in anger and so on. I shouldn't say in anger. I always had some soft spots for integration services, but I often found that, let's face it, we used to do ETL, right? We used to pull the data into something like into integration services, do a whole bunch of transforms, and then load it into the destination. And at some point, we switched to doing more like an ELT pattern, where we'd have our data and we'd put it into the environment that we kind of wanted it to go to, and then we'd do transformations on it there. And it was just kind of a a different way of doing things. But I feel like integration services stopped being part of the main story, apart from just like getting the data in. I feel like it stopped being the place for doing hefty transforms, and with that, fuzzy became a thing that was not being done, as much, if it was ever really being done. And part of the if it was ever really being done was just that how much could you tweak it? Like it was just you had a threshold, and that was about it. I'll come back to that kind of thing in a minute. Of course, these days we talk Power Query, right? Power Query Online. If I go over here to the Power BI environment, I've uploaded some data to this, and I did some. I didn't even bother rename the columns. This was just a dump into a CSV, and then I loaded stuff up. It was a dump out of the person.person table in AdventureWorks, and you'll see here that in Add Column we've got this Cluster Values button, right? I go, here's one I prepared earlier, but so if I'm saying, I want to do clustering on column 7, a name or something like that, I could have concatenated a whole bunch together. I could have transformed some data or something like that ahead of time. And then I'm saying, okay, and now I want to cluster stuff here, and I'm going to do it using some fuzzy cluster options, right? This is not a straight grouping. This is clustering, where the idea is that something that is close can fall into the same cluster, even though it wouldn't have been grouped together in a strict grouping concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, the Donald's saying he might be able to use a fuzzy matching for names that are projects at work. Fantastic. I'm keen to hear what you think of the stuff that I'm going to show you inside T-SQL and so on. Reed mentioned in the thing, spoiler, I think I gave it to you in the abstract, actually. Spoiler, the way that we want to do this might not be what you think. You'll see what I mean, Donald, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts on it. So, quite similarly, we've got a similarity threshold and so on. That's great. And we can tell it stuff like ignore case. Yeah, of course you'd want to ignore case. I mean, come on. And there's some concepts here. Do we want to show what the actual similarity scores are? There's some stuff around here about being able to combine text parts. And the idea is of saying, so for example, I might actually want to be able to join names together. Like if I've got somebody called, I've got a friend called Phil DeBoney, and he's got, of course, it's 3 words, Phil DeBoney, but a lot of people write it, his surname is 1 word, DeBoney. And this is the kind of thing where you don't want to be like, oh, hang on, that's a different guy because there's space in there. Weirdly, that's quite significant as far as this kind of thing is concerned. But more to the point is this concept of a transformation table. And I'll do the little tooltip thing as well, because it's not a bad explanation. The idea of saying, well, hang on, I kind of want to make stuff consistent. And so therefore, if I see something like MSFT, I'm going to, transform that into Microsoft. Having a from column and a to column to be able to go, just for the sake of making things more consistent, let's do this. I actually find that it's, MSFT, fine. MSFT is always going to be that. But of course, I tend to go from longer to shorter because I don't want to find that I'm inadvertently expanding something that wasn't what that was, right?
Yeah.
But there's a few options here, but it's not great. And if I've got data, I don't want to have to cluster everything every time. I feel like there's got to be a better way. And so I was, looking into this and so on. This is, a while back. And I noticed that some of the Python libraries for handling fuzzy stuff are kind of interesting, because let's face it, people spin up a new Python library for something and so on. And people take different kinds of approaches to how they do fuzzy and some of these different approaches can be more interesting, which gave me some clues as to some ideas for what I could do moving forward. Let me show you some stuff that we get now inside T-SQL, right? Because having seen how this works and kind of understanding the concepts of saying, well, actually, whenever we're doing this, we're going to have to do a lot of work every time. You know, like if we want to figure out that something's going to land in some cluster, you know, we've got to have those clusters, you know, like if we're just incrementally loading stuff, are those clusters already there? Are we just clustering on the new stuff, and does it match old clusters and so on? There's a lot of like questions about how this ends up landing. But let me switch to Management Studio. I've got person.person here, which has this last name, which I'm going to pay attention to. Is that text large enough? Do you want me to make it a bit bigger?
Yep. Oh yeah, that's good.
I'll go a bit more again. There we go. So what I want to do is I want to show you, if I grab, I think I've got some sample names here. Cool. And I'm connected. So these are some of the new functions that we've got in SQL 2025, right? They are very kind of industry standard things that tell me that if I've got two names, Reed Havens and Reed Havings, I don't know, I'm just, you know, they're kind of, I'm going to say like, you know, sound the same. And bear in mind, in T-SQL, we've had this soundex concept for a long time, where we go, we can do like soundex of a word and see what it is. But soundex is remarkably limited. It relies a lot on the first letter being correct, and you know that it's okay, but it's not great. Now we've got this kind of edit distance, how much you need to edit something to make it the same as something else, and we've got the Jarrow-Winkler distance. I actually have no idea whether it's Yarrow or Jarrow, but I just know that the Fonz is involved, right? Because the only Winkler I know is the Fonz. But you know, this is not necessarily awful, and you'll notice that it thinks that the distance between the JW distance between these two is that, and the similarity is pointed out. If I look at you versus Steve on your real names, the distance is much greater. The similarity is dropped off, of course. If I look at like two names that sound very much the same, Stephen Campbell like that, and Steve Campbell, where the PH thing, you know, and you know, the like where the edit distance is larger, but the JW distance is arguably smaller again. You know, there's a few things, you know, there's these don't seem too bad. And if I do edit some of these things, if I, for example, change the
Stephen Campbell, yeah.
If I change one of the, you know, then the distance obviously grows quite a lot, but it's still not necessarily too bad. My edit distance only grows by 1, but you know, it's interesting. The kind of typos that we get, of course, in names are things like this, right? Where someone just puts an adjacent character, and the distance is, you know, it increases quite a bit compared to knowing that ST is the main consonant sound there. But nevertheless, we've got some useful numbers here, and inside something like T-SQL, we've got better control of what's going on, right? And this is one of the things that's meant that I've always wanted to be able to do this kind of stuff inside T-SQL, is because I have control. I can control my where clauses and my grid bys and all that kind of thing. But if you notice these functions, it's a function where I pass in 2 parameters, right? This is not a good idea for indexing. With indexing, you want to be able to say, I've sorted my data in a particular way. That means that I can quickly find the thing that I'm looking for. if I'm trying to find the thing that is similar to, to Stephen Campbell like this, right? Then, well, I'm going to have to check everything, because how's it going to really know that it's closer to, to Steve than it is to Reed, for example? I can't index this at all, right? Or
True.
that's not a thing I can do. And if I'm trying to build clusters of stuff, that's also hard to do. And so I started to think of other ideas and so on. And of course, as so many things lean these days, I leant towards AI options. Now,
Yeah, I mean, it does to a degree, do a lot of these things a bit more efficiently, even though it's, yeah, to your point, it's more of a black box sometimes of how it does it. But
sure.
at least depending on the tool, some of them give you a bit more insight on like its thinking.
Yeah. Now, the idea of saying, hey, AI system, I've got 100,000 names, group these together, that's still going to be nasty, right? I do not want to have to pass, gigabytes of data into an AI thing to then be able to try to figure out, to be able to have it do all of the clustering and so on. As I would have done in the day in like a machine learning kind of environment. I remember the days of ML Studio, and I'd be like, oh yeah, take this data, do regression stuff on this, or cluster these, with different clustering algorithms and so on. And it wasn't too bad. Nothing that I want to try and show you today, because again, it's been a while since I've spun up an ML Studio, but still felt quite like a black box. And some things were good, and some things I felt didn't really scale, because if I had a whole ton of data and I wanted to be able to say, well, cluster around this, I felt like I was having to pass too much data in every time. And that brings me to my my kind of like idea for how to do this stuff. So I'm going to switch back to my browser. I'm not interested in that window anymore. And over here, what I've done is that I've spun up an Azure OpenAI resource inside Azure, right?
Okay.
I've called it vectorization because this is the thing that I'm being interested in, right? It's because what I want to be able to do is take my strings, and I want to be able to figure out some AI-ish stuff about them that I can then store and use as a reference as I move through my data, and then that I can actually have as a resource that I can incrementally load stuff into. So let me quickly explain the concept of vectors, and then I'll come back to to this. This is kind of like a pre-warning about being able to say, hey, I'll show you what I'm going to put into this OpenAI resource in a second. Now, so you remember back in high school, right? When you did vectors in maths. We do maths. You just do math. I don't know how that works. We do lots of different types of maths. So anyway, it's fine. The just a collation error thing. The concept here is to be able to say, well, if we can express something as an arrow between somewhere in space and somewhere else in space, right? Then we have a way of being able to say this arrow is similar to that arrow, or whatever. And vectors are actually a significant thing in the AI space, because if they can work out how to represent something as an arrow, then they can then figure out this arrow is similar to that arrow. And of course, vectors, we drew them on a page, and we had a 2D vector, and it was like direction and length and so on, and that was great. Of course, if you do it in space, you've got three dimensions, and the maths became a bit more complicated and so on. And Donald's telling in the chat he did plenty of vector maths in engineering school. Sure, because it's significant. The kind of vectors we're talking about in AI have a few more dimensions. And when I say a few more, I mean like we kind of start at the 1500 dimensions, right? The idea of trying to express something as an arrow in 1500 dimension space seems, excessive almost. But yeah, and Donald's saying linear regression can be done with vectors, by the way. Yeah, just about everything in AI can come down to vectors. Vectors kind of, at some point, people in the AI research space worked out, vectors is huge for this. I mean, when I did AI stuff back at university, like literally 30 years ago, I did, artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, all kinds of things, and it didn't feel like vectors were really a significant thing there. We had like genetic algorithms and so on. We had a lot of Lisp-based stuff. I did a lot of work in the language Lisp, which was interesting and kind of weird. And for a long time, I had the book Common Lisp Craft on my shelf at home because it was because I found that stuff interesting. I got a job offer, and that's what got me into consulting and programming and so on, and led me to where I am today. But if I'd been able to stay in academia, then yeah, I would have had fun in the AI thing. I considered doing a PhD at Edinburgh University at one point, but yeah, it didn't.
What made you back out of that one?
I had a job offer, and my wife, we were already together, and she did not like the idea of living in Scotland, and we visited there, and it was like summertime, like this time of year, and it was about 18 degrees outside, and people were walking around in t-shirts and stuff, and she's like, yeah, no, this is not okay, because 18 degrees in Adelaide is like, it's probably like today, actually. I say 18, I mean my 18. I don't mean your 18. Yeah, today our forecast max today is I'm wrong, we got 15 today. It's gonna be freezing. What the heck? But yeah, I'm just trying to translate that. I think 20 is like 68. So it would have been like
right.
mid 60s, and in Edinburgh that's summertime. It's very pleasant with the sun shining and so on. But my wife was just like, in her coat, was just like, yeah, no, this is no. And but yeah, we did live back in the UK for a while, but not in Scotland, down in London, and I was working. But yeah, but also there's the whole thing of paying bills and so on. I had a job offer from a strong consulting company, and that was an easy offer. Halfway through my honors year, I got my final year of my bachelor's degrees. I had some job offers, and so I picked the best of them, and that was easy. And so I gave up on the concept of a PhD, and then of course it becomes a thing where you just go, I don't think it's going to make much difference to my life. I know some people who call themselves doctor, whatever, and I was like, yeah, I'm not big on titles or positions or anything like that. I'm just, I'm interested in people, where I'm not the person I'm interested in. I'm interested in other people. But yeah, vectors became what AI was about. When you want to do some sort of, when you've got like a whole bunch of text and you want to be able to go, okay, I want information about this, you push that text or whatever through an algorithm, and you get a vector back, and that's something that you can store inside SQL 2025. And we have vector indexes so that you can then find other things in this index that have other things in this index within this table and so on that have a similar arrow vector to the one that we've just queried, the REST endpoint or whatever we're doing for for that vector that we want to introduce into the mix, so that when we say, I've got a question for you, and we push it through one of the AI things, we get something back. We go, this is about that, or whatever the case may be. It's for anybody who's kind of just going, yeah, that sounds tricky. I'm just interested in the front end of AI. I want to be able to turn on AI Copilot, for example, within Power BI, within Fabric. Yeah, great. That's useful. It's nice to be able to understand the right prompts, to be able to get stuff out, be able to train it about your data and all that kind of stuff. That's great. But actually, when you start looking at some of the things that you can get through an OpenAI resource inside Azure, you start to open up other doors. And one of my favorite things about SQL 2025, and in fact in just Azure SQL as well, is that you've got these vectors, so that you can actually make a call out to something. You can then store that, index that, and have a more interesting time with your vectors. So let me show you what's going on here. Sorry, I felt like Patrick LeBlanc for a minute. Let me show you my machine. The machine's already on there.
Now let's hop over to the PC.
Yeah, all of that. If I go over to the Foundry portal, it spins up a new window and so on, and I see that we've got this whole chat playground, all that kind of stuff. Cool, not a problem, whatever. I'm not interested in any of that. I'm interested down here in deployments, right? And I have deployed this model here. I could do another one, right? And I could say, yeah, I just want to deploy a model, and I'm going to look for stuff in here, and there's a whole bunch of things in here that are interesting. Okay, there's a lot of stuff, right? And in here, there's some text embedding stuff, right? There's this large one, and there's also a small one that's in the list somewhere. I'm going to hit cancel on this because I made one earlier. I'm using this one, which is text embedding small. I didn't bother naming it or whatever. This is just something that I threw together, I guess, a while back. The model is going to retire next year, but there'll be something else to pop up to replace it. But this is all I did is come in here and do this, right? And then and then having done that, I can click into it and I can see a whole bunch of information. Now, the thing I'm not going to do is click to show you the key. Trust me, I grabbed that before, right? And there's some stuff about going, how do I get started with this? And I can change the language that I want to look at, not to SQL, but that's fine. But yeah, but this is about all I need to do here, right? Because my point is that all I want to do is have something that I can push my strings through to create vectors that I can then store and use to be able to see what is similar to what, right? So having done that, let me switch back to Management Studio. And I'm going to show you some of my setup stuff. Now, I typically do actually, let me start over here. I typically like to type in demos, but what I mean is I don't like having pre-prepared scripts. I've got some pre-prepared scripts here because there's stuff which is too long to just be able to go, I want to type this out. But the idea here is that if I want to, I started off by doing something like this, right? So I was just like, I want to get my list of different names, and I want to be able to get a feel for how many there are in each, right? If I, out of curiosity, but just out of curiosity, I could say order by that second column. I haven't given a name, so I'm just going to call it 2 and go descending so I can see what the most common name is. It's Diaz, right? Of course it is. I'm always coming across people called Diaz. It's just a thing. Every time I've mentioned that in a room full of people, there has not been a single person with the last name Diaz in the room. One day it's going to change, and I'll be like half the room will be Diaz, and I'll be like, finally. I just think I need to choose where I'm doing their presentations. Maybe if I'm doing it in like Southern California or somewhere in Latin America, maybe it'll be more popular. But yeah, whole bunch of names in here, right? Because ultimately, if I'm going to, look, there's a read. Ultimately, if I'm going to, I know it's the wrong read. I apologize.
No worries.
I didn't plan that. I didn't be like, I'll go down to row 77 and show there's 94 reads. I didn't. That wasn't in my plan. If I'm gonna vectorize some words, I don't. If I've seen the thing before, I don't need to vectorize it again. It's going to give me the same value each time, right? So what I've done is that I've dumped these into a table called just DVO names because I was not creative, right? And I put the count in there, and I've pushed these through. I've pushed these through my vectorization, and I've come back with some of these. Let me grab that one for the word read, right? Got to type properly. My keyboard is on an angle, which is not
I'll like type in from a corner.
Yeah, it's annoying me. What I actually want to do is show you what this name embedding looks like, right? So I can show you like that. What I'm actually going to do is say switch to give results as text, which I think is that one. Yeah, I was just going to hit Control T, but that's not useful for your listeners to know what I did. It's this, right? This lets me scroll more, but you'll see it's number after number, right? And in fact, there's 1,536 numbers there. And if
that's a good amount.
Yeah, and if I look at my the definition of my names, that squiggle is because I didn't write exec in front of it. But and I should switch back to showing the results in here. What I've done here is I've created this as a vector. That's not the actual length. This is a vector 1536, right? Because that's how I store that vector of 1,500 floats, basically. But what I do to be able to actually create this is that I just do something like this. That API key, I stored in a table so that I didn't need to show your listeners because I'm sure they're trustworthy, but let's face it, I don't trust them. If I showed my API key on there, I'm sure I would suddenly have spent too much, right? So I grabbed that from a table where I've stored it. And I stick it into a header and I say this is going to be JSON, and I create a payload which is simply input that name. And I could do that with a whole bunch, but I'm just trying to show you like how it works for one of them, right? And then I call this new thing, which is SP invoke external REST endpoint, which has been around for a year or two, and is how we can actually call something external from inside the SQL engine. It's this SQL 2025 is the first time it's available on-prem. But yeah, it's been available in Azure SQL for a year or two, and I'm going to call that URL that I got from
the vectorization
from that web page, right? From my from over here, that target there, right? You can see from the tooltip is what I used in that call, right? And so I'm doing that, and I'm grabbing the result based on the JSON that it gives me, and I, worked out what this needed to be because, open JSON is annoying and all that kind of stuff, but it's this, right? It's that code. And if I do this for what I'm going to do, I inserted, I think I already inserted. Hang on a second. In a second, I will show you something about how we're going to do this. But for a minute, I need to remove that index. Just like how when we got clustered index, column store indexing, the first round, it was a read-only thing. At the moment, vector index is a read-only, and I will point out to you in a moment when I talk about them some more why it's not actually a bad option, right? Anyway, I'm going to insert havens in there because it's not in there yet, right? And then I'm going to run this to basically pick up in here somewhere. I had some code that said, grab me just a name that I don't have yet, right? I could do this with passing multiple in at once, just pass them all that kind of stuff. I'm imagining a scenario where I've got a new name appeared and I want to find the stuff that is not yet handled, right? So if I if I do all this and select the embedding vector, but I'm also going to update names for that name that doesn't have one, we can see that that embedding vector looks like this. And sure enough, we've updated the row for you, right? For havens. And so now when I look at names where the name equals havens, I see there's my row. You don't actually exist in my people table, so I've got 0 against you. And this is the embedding for it. Of course, you recognize that, I'm sure. This is one of those things where you go, oh, isn't it supposed to be 2.6? No, I don't know, right? But then we can do useful stuff with this, right? And significantly here, I go, well, I want to be able to create an index. I've got to turn on this trace flag. Go figure, this is documented, right? And I'm going to create an index. And I can create an index that's either cosine or Euclidean. I'm going to create the, there's actually a third one, but I find that these two are the most useful. Cosine is kind of about the angle between them and so on. Euclidean is more about where does it end up in space, right? But and I quite like cosine because I'm more interested in like the angle of the vector. But you try, like with all AI stuff, you try various things and see what's what, right? And now I've got this query that I'm playing with, right? So here I'm going to query names where I'm looking at havens, right? And I'm going to do a cross apply to be able to say, find me the cosine vector difference between N1, the havens row, and all of the other ones, right, that are different, right? And order by distance. In other words, find the closest one, right? And if I run this, I can see that it reckons that the name that's in there that's closest to havens is Haynes, but it's a distance of 0.48, right? But I've got full control over this. At the JW distance, though, so that's the vector distance. I also apply these other functions that I've got, these new ones, to be able to see that it reckons that it's that close to it on a JW, or this close to it on an edit distance, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so then I can make choices about this and decide to do it the way that I want to be able to do it. Now, so this isn't too bad. And I tried with different other names and so on. But what I want to do is I want to make this into clusters, right? So with my index in place, I did some stuff around being able to say, I want to recreate some stuff and I want to be able to update so that I don't have clusters yet. But my idea here is that I'm going to loop through row by row at first, right? But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for each name that I come across, right, I'm going to grab a name. I'm basically doing a cursor, but, I'm just doing it with a loop because otherwise I've got cursor code and I feel like I've got to kind of explain that. But the idea here is I'm going to get the first name that is not in a cluster already. And I'm going to find what I think the cluster is. Now, the way that I've decided to do this is to be able to get the top 5 by vector distance, right? Where I, like the 5 closest, I'm going to put a threshold on that, but then I'm going to order them by the JW distance, right? But this is whatever you want to use to be able to make it work for you, right? And then if I find a cluster, I say, sure, set it to that. If I don't, I just set the cluster number to be the next value in my sequence. Right?
Okay.
So the whole point is here, I start with no clusters. I run something, I go, yep, let's call that cluster 1. I do the next thing, I go, if it's close enough to something that I've already got, let's add it to that cluster. If not, let's make a new one, right? And I just loop through that. And then I query at the end to be able to go, what does it look like? So I just want to drop comment.
What's the largest set that you've ran this against out of curiosity? What's its scalability?
I've run it against sets that are actually quite large, but I will like hundreds of thousands. My set here is relatively small, but I want to highlight actually to you the incremental bit, right? I care slightly less about how it first sets up I'm more interested in the next bit, right? So I do this, and it's doing a bunch of that clustering, and then it's querying back to say, find me the clusters that have got more than one name in there, right? So that we can see what's been grouped together. And here we can see that it's matched various things, right? I don't like this one. Goldberg and Goldstein got matched together, right? Yeah, okay. But I do like the fact that Chestnut and Chestnut got put together, and so on, right? This one's interesting. Hernandez and Fernandez, right?
Well, I mean,
Especially
they're super close, technically.
Right. But in SoundX and various other methods, they would.
Yeah, well, that's
never
where
have
like
been
AI
picked.
comes into play, because that could recognize that's a
Right.
first and a last name off of what you'd want to do on that is almost maybe give it a data dictionary where like these you have a list of common first names, common last names, and then part of your logic is, regardless of other attributes, which of the name types are these associated with.
Yeah. And you also want to be able to have exclusions in there, really, to be able to say,
yeah,
don't match. If we've got exactly this and exactly this, don't match them together. If there's something that's neither, find the one that's closest, but consider these separate clusters. And you can pre-build clusters with clean data and so on, right? There's not a problem with that, right?
true.
But the thing that I see here, right, is that we're building up clusters based on a whole bunch of names. We then get some new name, right? And all we need to do is figure out which clusters the new names fit into. We don't need to recluster all the existing sets, right?
Fair.
We've got an index on this. So it doesn't matter if our index has hundreds of thousands of rows. We grab the 10 new names that appeared and we go, okay, let's vectorize these. Let's figure out what they're closest to and what clusters they're in, and insert them, right? With any logic that we want to do, but we're only having to deal with our new ones, right? I mentioned that read-only index. Well, okay, but that's like having a Parquet file and a Delta section, right? I can always rebuild my index at a time when I've got an opportunity. I can just go, well, okay, I don't need to. I have to look in a union of the ones that I know, and then the ones that are still in deltas, where I've got the vectors, but they're not inside the vector index, right? But the concept here is a bunch of new names. Let's vectorize them. Let's see what they match and build that out. No longer am I needing to say, well, I've got this set of names and I want to just do fuzzy grouping across them. Well, yeah, okay, but how does that actually run? It's got to take pretty much the whole set every time. That's not ideal for incremental loads, right? Because an incremental load it's fine if you're just saying, oh, I'll do a lookup for that, do a lookup for that, do a lookup for this, and so on. And a fuzzy lookup might be able to look up against some stuff, but it's hard to try. It's got to check a lot of stuff because there's no proper indexing on that. The proper indexing we get with vectors actually gives us an opportunity to do some cool stuff. And because it's T-SQL, we've got full control over count this, don't count that, look for these exceptions, look for these inclusions, all of this kind of stuff. We can do our own clustering and make it smart, enhanced by the smarts of AI, but really with our own smarts being in there, right? For me, this is a much nicer way of doing fuzzy. Let's see, O'Connell and on O'Donnell. I would want them to be different. I think Meyer and Meyerhoff. Well, yeah, but certainly McDonald and MacDonald, totally they're the same name. Phillips and Phillips, they're the same, right? I would consider those different, but I've got full control. I can review what's been matched. I can
and put the
out.
human eye element. It's the 80-20, right? Like you're getting 80% of the way there, but still allowing for that.
But bear in mind, I wasn't trying to do anything particularly smart. I just went, okay, let's just consider stuff that's vector distance of that, and then get the closest JW distance. But I could do whatever I want in here because it's my code. I'm not just dealing with a dialogue where I've got a slider. I can do whatever I want here, So yeah.
True.
So I like the fuzzy stuff. it gives me, being able to do something like this is tremendously useful. But really, the concept of vectors, the concept of being able to call something, the concept of being able to call out to, to an endpoint inside SQL and be able to just go, yeah, get me that for a thing that I spun up in Azure that took like 2 minutes to set up is huge, I think, for
Well, the
suddenly being
cost,
able to have
the
more
time
power
savings
over
for a lot of
this.
this stuff. Yeah.
So I like the fact that we can do stuff inside Power Query. It frustrates me that it's only in Power Query Online, so I can't just build it into like Power BI Desktop and so on. But I love this, the concept of building stuff into a SQL database that might be inside Fabric and so on, where you've still got these vectors and you can call the endpoints and so on. I'm like, for me, building up a warehouse where I then want to be able to do my own clustering of names and fuzzy lookup type stuff and so on. For me, what we've got now is starting to actually give me the functionality that I want with fuzzy matching. And let's face it, the concept of going, is this person the same as that person, or is that thing the same as that thing, or whatever the case may be, is bigger than ever these days, as people are so interested in data quality and yeah.
Well, and to your point, to the data quality is becoming ever more important, but I also do think like there's more and more systems out there where there's not direct keys.
Yeah. I mean, I put to have the vector index on there, I need to have keys on the names and so on. But and if whenever I get a new name in there, first thing I'm going to do is, do I already know who this person is? Like, have I already got an exact match on that name or that, whatever? Because a lot of the time somebody walks into a store and they create an account and you go, I know who you are. I get their address, for example, and their address is in a database I've got of addresses that have been used. If it's the first time I've seen it, then yeah, I might need to do some smarts. If I've seen that one before, we're good. But yeah, the AI stuff makes things interesting, and I feel like this is it's a significant enhancement to analytics environments, and not just analytics environments, like even just like relational systems. This becomes for me a significant thing. But I'm already seeing that I'm using this kind of stuff in warehouses that I'm building out and so on, because it's finally giving me the options that I want inside grouping and lookups and so on. But yeah.
Do you have, by the way, for some of the AI built-in things outside of what's in Azure and any of the open AI stuff? Do you have between the platforms that we have today, OpenAI, Anthropic, X, I guess technically, and then Google? Do you have a preference or know enough about all four to kind of have some thoughts on any of between them?
To be honest, I find that the one that I spin up the most is Copilot, largely because quite often I'm wanting to ask it about stuff that is, like work related, right? I find that but this is the thing. It depends on so many things about what I'm trying to do with it and so on. Like but I do find that the Copilot inside M365 is fascinatingly useful, because it's seen all my SharePoint documents and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm heading into a meeting and I can ask Copilot connected to my work stuff, hey, tell me what I need to know about this. And it's seen my emails, it knows my calendar, it knows, everything about the people that I'm meeting and the notes that have been in documents and so on. And I find that is really handy as an assistant. And because I want it to see my Microsoft stored data, it makes sense for me to think about Copilot inside M365 for that. But then I find that because I'm already inside Copilot, it's so easy to switch to the web thing to be able to go, yeah, answer questions for me that are not work related as well. So, but yeah, so probably my just standard go-to ends up being Copilot, but it very much depends on what I'm trying to do. Like, do I want an image? Do I want to create something that is, because I'm also quite big on actually, if there are people that can produce something for you rather than AI, it's nicer to use the people. As a comedian, I'm in the artist
end of the day,
space.
hopefully.
Yeah. Like I see a lot of comedians creating posters using AI to do that. And it's just like, yeah, please understand that there are people whose businesses are creating posters and they will probably do a better job for you than what the AI will. So it's interesting. There's certainly ethics to talk about around the concept of AI use in general. But yeah, I appreciate
it's a whole different.
We could talk for ages, but I'll leave the timing of the session up to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a whole different can of worms on like the ethics around that stuff. But
totally.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I think to kind of to stay on topic with this is, I guess for using this within SQL Server, do you see other more of like business oriented types of connectors or options that you've do you have anything else on the wish list that like, hey, this has been in Power Query for 12 years, while SQL should be getting this as well, for some of the other type of data transformations that they have?
I feel like the fuzzy stuff is the thing that I've been asking for literally 20 years. Well, I know I asked 20 years ago, and every so often it's popped up, and I've said, that's and I've said, by the way, how are we going on getting fuzzy stuff to happen? And I always get told, oh yeah, maybe we're thinking about it at some point. But like what I find is that I'm okay about things being mostly just there inside Power Query type transforms, and I'm okay with them doing that if they're doing them just fine. Whereas I feel like fuzzy was one of those things that never really felt like it scaled enough. It didn't really, the concept of it's got to check everything. When you got larger data sets, I feel like it wasn't doing things so nicely. And I find that, but I don't feel like I've got a big list of, I wish I could do this in the engine, and I wish I could do this in the engine, well, like the SQL engine, because I'm often totally fine about doing a lot of transforms inside the Power Query space. I think it's very good. I don't really have an issue with it, but I do feel like there is still it depends on the shape of the thing, right? If you've got like a Python data engineering thing that's picking up data and transforming it and dumping it into a lake style storage, then sure, you're going nowhere near the SQL engine, and that's fine. And if you still got your star schema design from that and so on, that's great. I still find that there's a lot of customers who go, I quite like SQL. I feel like at home with SQL, I want to be able to write queries against that without having to learn DAX or whatever. And so I still see that there are customers who, given the choice, will say, actually, can we have a SQL-based warehouse? And with the SQL offerings inside Fabric, that's certainly a very doable thing. But it was always a doable thing. People could spin up an Azure SQL DB environment or an Azure SQL DW environment, Synapse, and there are. I think there's call for both. For me, I see that having the kinds of transforms that I might want to be able to do in a transactional environment, as well as an analytical environment, is great, because I live in both worlds. The concept of calling an external REST endpoint from a SQL environment fits in some scenarios and not in others. And sorry, Donald's just written in the thing, SQLDB is all you need and has real primary and foreign keys. Sure, I agree. I think I agree that SQLDB is a fantastic tool that is not going away anytime soon. The fact that they've brought Fabric SQLDB into the mix is testament to the fact that people still want relational databases even in analytical environments. And although it might not be in fashion at the moment, it's still a requirement. it might not be the default option for people, but it hasn't gone away. And
True, it's evolved more than anything.
yeah. And I know people that are just like, oh my goodness, why on earth would you want to make a call to a REST endpoint from inside SQL? But my take is that actually there's all kinds of times when you're doing something and you need to be able to call something external because, like, we've got distributed computing more than ever these days. And the idea of not having to use an external process to be able to make that call is huge. By all means, you don't want to stick it inside a critical transaction that you need to finish in a couple of milliseconds. But the idea of being able to do it without having to leave the SQL environment is still huge. And I even had a session with Anna Hoffman on her Data Expose a while back about SP invoke external REST endpoint, because I think it's significant. It's not like I'm going, finally I can do this and I can call all kinds of things and it's a massive enhancement. But I do find that there are plenty of times where I go, I've got this process where I grab data and I push it all into here, and then I push it back and the response back into SQL, and I'm just like, I don't have to do that using an external process anymore. I can just do it straight inside SQL. And so when I'm creating something new like that now, I go, yeah, I'll just do that inside a stored proc. And that's really handy. As opposed to spinning up some Python or PowerShell or whatever in an external process.
How good are you even? Like, I feel like I only can count on a few hands, like the number of people who are like super good at like PowerShell, Riri Romano being one of them.
Sure. Yeah. No, I like PowerShell a lot. I was presenting on it a long time ago, but I do feel like it's kind of disappeared as Python has risen up, and even the fact that on that web page that we saw a C# example and a Python example and a JavaScript, I think was the other one, and there's no mention of PowerShell anywhere. And sure, but I find that scripting environments are still useful. I don't want to have to create something in C# and then compile it. Python is fine. And let's face it, every kid coming out of university these days knows Python. And
knows how to vibe code it at least.
Sure. So, it's I mean, Python is definitely a lot of like where it's at, but just the concept of saying it's an external script that's doing some stuff, is it doesn't need to be external so much, now that we can call these endpoints. It's like sending emails from inside the SQL engine. You can do it. Would you really want to? Actually, there are plenty of times when you do. So so don't just assume that actually the right way to do it is to have an external process that queries data and sends an email when it needs to. That might be great, but if you can do it just inside SQL, then it's an option. Anyway.
The Matthew Roach's maxim: as far upstream as possible, downstream as necessary.
Sure. Yep. Right. And so when your data is in a SQL environment, why pull it out into a separate process to do some stuff if you can actually do it up there? The closer you can get, the more upstream you can put all your transforms, the better. It's funny. I feel like I haven't seen Matthew for ages. I worked with him before he was with Microsoft back in 2006. I was doing some stuff with him with exam-based stuff on the old BI exams. We did some work on together back in cool. I think it was 2006, maybe 2007. And but yeah,
he's one of my favorite people.
We go way back, and I love the fact that he's now got a maxim that gets quoted. I was like, how does that work? But yeah, he's a good guy.
He's I feel like he's somewhat quotable, but I'm very strong on his principles, I think.
Sure, and his swordsmanship too. He's very big on his principles. I'm sure that it's been a long time since I've been in like work style meetings with him. But he's definitely a guy that you want on your side in a room.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether he's got his swords with him or not, you want him on your side because he's gonna fight for the right thing.
But exactly. Good, strong principles with that, I think, for sure.
Mm.
Is there anything else that you want to show or like kind of wrap up it all with in terms of either links, topics, references to people where to get started, things to spin up their own, like vectorization, stuff like that?
For getting started on this, it really just comes down to being able to, I suppose, understand that these things are out there now. I would, by all means, encourage people to explore the stuff they can do inside those OpenAI bits. The concept of like how did I come across the text embedding options and so on that are in there? That was just kind of, I was exploring ideas and so on, and what you could do with stuff and how various things worked, and I came across the concept of getting this string embedding thing, and I switched back to that Foundry tab here. But so when I'm back here and I'm saying let's create a new model, understanding some of the fact that you can make calls to all kinds of useful things out here, is huge. Sure, there's plenty that you would never want to do inside SQL, right? The concept of creating audio and stuff like that is less likely to be a transform that you want in your analytics or even a relational environment. But actually there are some things in here that you may want to do, like the concept of being able to have someone's uploaded a PDF and you want to be able to extract some information from it and so on. Well, some of these calls might be very good for what you can get from that. And a lot of it is quite tunable and so on with what you get back. Don't devalue the concept of the vectors that you get back and what you can do with that inside SQL these days. It's when you're dealing in an environment that doesn't have the vectors right there, you're slightly worse off. So creating vectors, storing the vectors, indexing the vectors, bringing them into your thinking when you're doing your transforms. As far as links for that kind of thing, yeah, it's. I would just I would explore options, find out how things work, and then you'll see doors open. But as far as places to start with that, think what you're trying to achieve and research how that thing works. So then be able to get a feel for whether you can do something with AI. It doesn't have to be about strings. It could be about, just about anything. But yeah. It's and by all means, use your favorite AI tool to be able to get started on tell me how this thing works and show me links for that is a great way to get links for doing your research.
And for anything that's going to point directly back to any upcoming events or anything that you're doing, any links at all or references of places you might be headed to soon?
Later in the year, I'm speaking at Dfinity, which is a ResoRads conference that he's running in Auckland, Sydney, and Melbourne. I'm not speaking in the Auckland dates, but I am speaking at Sydney and Melbourne. It used to just be an Auckland conference. I did the first one. I even spoke I did the keynote for the first Dfinity conference that ResoRan back in 2017. And
that's cool.
In the last few years, he's made it like a on tour kind of thing across Auckland and Sydney and Melbourne. And I'm speaking there at Sydney and Melbourne about new things in SQL 2025. This type of stuff will come up, but in a more condensed form. I continue to run my own user group in Adelaide, and I'll be speaking at that in September, which will be the 20th anniversary of when I took over running the group from the guy. I didn't start the group, but I got.
That's cool. So you've been doing it for 20 years.
September 2005, yeah. And I mean, Adelaide's a small city, but I feel like the community is quite strong here, and I've been a part of that for more than 20 years, including running the user group for since September 2005. It's good. I get to help new speakers come through. I get to encourage people. I get to introduce people to people on the product group and so on. This year we've had like Joanna Podgorski speak to us, and Kate Smith from the various product groups over in Seattle, and that's good. Time zone wise, we have our meetings at lunchtime here, which is like about 2.5 hours later than now. So it's manageable for West Coast. And then when daylight savings starts here and ends,
I'm getting the link for you.
It opens.
I found it.
It opens stuff for the East Coast. But yeah, so
There we are.
My meetup for that is goes back on the old. It used to be the SQL Server user group. This is our user group. No, not that one. It's not the Adelaide Azure user group. It's the data analytics one, the one that's got me on it. That link that you've done is a different one.
What's the other one then? Do you have the link you can give me?
It's on the screen.
I need to do a text extraction.
I can. It's fine. It's. Do I have to hit join the chat on here? Is that?
You have a private chat. Yep.
Oh yeah, I'll type into private chat and then you can put the comments on. That works. That link there that I've just sent you that you're going to copy into the public comments is my it's the user group that I run. My company is lobsterpot.com.au, which is this. And of course I'm on LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. People can find that. I will drop the LobsterPot link here for you. I will grab my LinkedIn link. I used to have my MVP logo there as well, but not anymore. I've had to update all the references to my MVP status to say former MVP. It's just one of those things. But yeah, the user group, I'm certainly proud of the fact that we've been around for a long time and so on. We've moved from platform to platform. We're now part of Meetup, and yeah,
Meetup's a good platform.
It is. It's certainly a good thing. All our meetings are hybrid. We of course in COVID days moved to completely online, but I still like in person. I think in person is more where it's at. People should turn up to events in person when they can. But because we have various people who can't, we always always provide a Teams link, and even if someone's presenting in the room, we make that available. I have the local Microsoft office where we meet has a Surface Hub, one of those computers on an easel, and if the speaker is remote, I stick the easel next to the projector screen, and I stick the presenter's face on that, and I use that for video and audio, so that people will look at the presenter and they can see the person speaking, and the presenter can see the people in the room, and as well as looking up to the side when they want to see the shared content. And that works really well. And if the speaker is in the room, I stick the Surface in the audience looking at the speaker, so that people who are joined online can see what's happening in the room as if they're in the audience. So
that's cool.
So I have the two kind of setups because I want the speakers to feel like they're connecting. Today I'm talking to you and I can see your face, and that's useful. But when I give a remote presentation, I find that it's frustrating because I often just can't see what's happening, or I'm just looking at my webcam and that's it. And it's not what I want, So I want people. I'm interested in people. I'm not interested in just speaking to a webcam. I want to speak to the people who are there. And I assume that the people who are presenting to my group want to see the room and see the faces of the people looking back at them. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I like it. People
Anyway,
first.
of course, it's always about the people. If I had to do over again, I don't even know that I'd get involved in tech because technology is great, but technology is full of technologists and people who are getting excited about the technology, and I'm like, it's got to be about the people that the technology is serving.
Exactly.
It can't just be technology because it's called technology. It's got to be about the customer, about the impact that the technology can have. But yeah, one of those things.
Let me top this off. There you go. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing this. I think one exciting new feature that's been coming out for SQL with this. But it's nice to see, as you mentioned, something that you've been asking about for 20 years, slowly moving its way down. I better said upstream to a more centralized source for this. So very cool. Any final closing remarks before we sign off?
No, just a big thank you for joining. Big thanks to Donald for actually putting comments in the chat. I don't know how many people have joined us live, but it's good to see somebody interacting. So thanks, Donald, for that. And he says he agrees about in-person presentations. And yeah, I would certainly encourage all your listeners, even though your listeners are through YouTube. I think that audience should embrace the in-person meetings because they'll find that their networking is stronger with that, and that they can start to actually see. It's just a whole different experience that I feel like the world has kind of, I want to say moved on from, but it's kind of moved to the side a little bit, and they need to realize that there was a lot of strength in that. So
yeah, I would agree.
Like I enjoy seeing you in person much more than I enjoy seeing you just on the screen.
Well, yeah, there's nothing that can beat that, right?
Yeah, except that a lot of people seem to forget that. They're like, oh, that's fine, I can just join remotely, but it's not the same.
Exactly. Never going to be quite the same, but it gives us a nice backup at least for that. But with that being said, though, I do got to go run here. I'm heading out to go sailing tonight, and then I'll let you have the rest of your morning as well.
Yeah, I have way too much stuff to get on with, so yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on for this, though, and I'll keep you posted on the view counts and everything that we get here in the next few weeks. But thank you for coming on, sharing this, and look forward to running into you as well at the next conference as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that there'll be a time. It won't be the MVP Summit, but it'll be at some point somewhere.
Exactly. One of the upcoming ones.
Yeah, cool. All right. Thanks, Reid.
All right. Take care and have a great morning.
Yeah, catch you soon.